Good. Hi everyone, this is Rapid Diffs Weekly, and we have a point from Patrick.
Yep. Yeah. First point, posted my thoughts on caching strategy using Redis in this issue. So I created a spike MR just to test like how would it perform if we cache the rendered HTML for rapid diffs. And summary, this caching strategy is using Redis hash for MR, and that Redis hash has a field for each diff file that will be caching. And we store the rendered HTML in cache. And based on that, it shows around 19 to 22% improvement in response times. Just not including the latency between the client and the server. It's just the response time of the server. Right now, it takes around 500 milliseconds for streaming endpoint to finish everything. So it is that using an MR with 100 files, and each file is a 5 KB file. So that's my test data. But to me, the 19 to 22% doesn't seem like a huge improvement. So, yeah. Any thoughts on this?
I feel the same. I felt like at least for the diff streaming endpoint, the improvement should be in terms of like 80, 90, 95%. It should feel like instant, right? And if it's just 20%, we are not gaining much with this and adding complexity. I wonder what we can do to make it a lot faster, even on the like POC, not in production.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's something that's slow before we fetch something from the cache. Does it make sense? So it seems that even though we're caching the rendered HTML, there are some parts way before that are still slow. So it's something I need to look at.
I think one thing we cannot avoid at all is checking for permissions. So we definitely have to fetch the user, fetch the MR, check if the MR is accessible by the user. But after that, seems like the path is straightforward to Redis. And maybe we are doing something else here. Like you've described that we are using diff collection to get our key, right? I wonder if we can figure out how to skip the step, just don't fetch the diffs at all, figure out which version we are using at the moment and fetch it, right? We can even explicitly pass to the diff stream endpoint which version we would like to see. But maybe that can work.
We need the collection because we need the file paths.
But if we are caching a version, we are basically saying this is a version against this branch, and we really don't care which files are in that version, right? We only care that this is the version that is cached.
Yeah. And I'll try that out. But that will skip. Yeah, the approach will be kind of different. Because right now the current approach is like we iterate through each diff file and we check if that diff file exists in the cache. And if it's not, we render it. Because we are only partially rendering, we are only partially caching the diff files in this approach. We're not caching everything. We're not, for example, in this 100 changes MR, we're only caching like the first 40 files. Not all of them. So yeah, that's something to consider. But I think it can work. Yeah, I'll try that out. Yeah, thanks for that. But yeah.
I had a question, Patrick. So these comparisons you're saying about around 19 to 22%, you're working with diffs from, like, are you getting the data from Gitly or are you getting the data from the database on these comparisons? I'm trying to see, is this when diff is computed on the MRs, it's persisted on the database, right?
Yeah. So I'm getting it
This
from the
comparison
database.
for database. Would you say that if we compare it, if we use this approach on non-persisted, non-database persisted diffs, the ones we get straight from Gitly, which would be the source code example, the repository diffs and comparative revisions, would you say that that difference would be larger, or is the timing that we're getting things from Gitly more or less the same in the database? Do we know?
Yeah, a bit different because we need to, for let's say for commits, I'm imagining we need to get the, well, I think about it. If we're going with the suggestion of Stanislav, for MRs, we're going to use the version. For commits, we're going to use the commit ID. So if we get the commit ID and it's already cached, that should be quick.
Sure,
But-
but when you're not cached, then the alternative is to get it straight from Gitly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think eventually what we can do if we need to we could always have some parameters to be like controlling from which moment do we cache? Do we cache all of them? Do we just cache MRs that are diffs that are larger than X? Using that sort of approach, I mean, I don't know. We still need to know the number of files and stuff, but I don't know. I'll just sit back and hear you discuss.
I think that this per se is actually a good indicator of how much highlighting takes off the request, because essentially this caching approach only skips the highlighting part and adds a little bit of overhead on the Redis side. So technically, if we would remove highlighting completely, we would see the same improvement, right? And seems like the slowest part is actually fetching the diffs from the database, it seems like. And going through all the checks, etc.
The rendering takes time, aside from highlighting.
Yeah, rendering, but I feel like rendering is not taking more than like 5% of it.
No, actually, I think because based on this testing, the highlighting is already cached. So we already have a separate cache for highlighted lines. So since it's already cached, this 19 to 22% is that rendering part.
How do we cache highlighting? Is it in the database as well?
It's in Redis. Wait, let me check.
Okay. Because I
They
remember
could-
I checked.
Yeah.
I checked how view components render stuff, and I found that highlighting took most part of the process, and fetching the diffs was also a big chunk of it. So maybe it's not working for me locally.
Yeah, I mean, I just checked the code. I'm probably wrong. Because we're not calling the method that caches the highlighted lines. So this is probably inputting highlighting time as well. So it's something we need to check.
Should we move on to point C? Oh, I thought it was you reading, Stanislav. Sorry. It was just Patrick saying that Stanislav has commented.
Yeah, it's just another point. It's me, still me. So Stanislav has already commented on some of the things and the issue. There are some things I would like to discuss. If we're going through this to do this Redis caching, do we need to pre-warm the cache? Do we see the need now?
Now, if you're just asking what I would like to see, yes. But having the notion that the heavy usage that MR diffs get, and the footprint that this would mean for Redis, and then eventually not being used, I would be comfortable in the first stage for now. Don't pre-warm the cache. And then later, once we have this in production and stuff and working, we can do a forecast and, you know, potentially start to learn a little bit more about usage and potentially pre-warm the cache in certain conditions. Because, you know, yeah, the first time you render the MR, it would be nice to have it really fast. But the thing is, if the first person to render that MR takes a little longer, like 20% longer, but the following renders until the MR changes, it's much faster. I think that's already a win. That's I would say that no, but I'd like to hear more thoughts.
Yeah, I have the same opinion. So I just want to hear other people's thoughts. It's like it's a nice to have. We can live without it for now because we currently we don't have it. So
I think we can do this on client side, sort of. So once you go to the overview tab, we can start fetching diffs in the background, and that will automatically pre-warm the stuff for you. That means you actually would like to kind of see diffs, right? And we are not wasting our precious Redis storage for this, for every single MR that is created. We can also create some smarter techniques for that. For example, if a user, if not an author and not a reviewer, we might not actually request anything, right? Because we are not sure why the user is there. So there are more ways to optimize it on the client, feels like.
Like a prefetching, some sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair compromise for now. It's a two-way door decision. We can always come back later and implement a pre-warming of the cache if we feel like we need to, and that we can benefit from it. So I'm okay with that for now. So, if anyone disagrees? All right, next question.
yeah, next question. So to me, it's also optional because right now the POC is just letting the cache expire, so it has an 8-hour expiration. But of course, I mean, if it gets stale, it still uses what you call this Redis storage for going with Redis. So the question is, do we need to expire the validated cache manually, or just let them expire on their own? I'm thinking it's kind of the same with pre-warmed cache.
It's slightly different though. What I'm thinking, here's what I'm worried. We'll start to be occupying a lot of Redis footprint for things that are no longer needed. What's the TTL on this? What were we thinking about the TTL? Like a day, an hour,
8
30
hours.
minutes, 8 hours.
Yeah, that's based on we were discussing it back then. That other issue, like 8 hours is a good starting point. Then once we have it in production, we have more data. We can what do you call this? We can either bump it down or bump it up.
Good. I think if we invalidate it on like just certain events, things we know are going to be invalidating that cache, like a push to that branch or something like that, I think that could potentially help us keep the footprint smaller. Good. Hold, that's what I'm worried. I'm worried that like it just takes 8 hours for things to expire, but somebody pushed an MR right away, pushed on a commit after that right away, or somebody put in a suggestion after an hour or something, that would be not only that, if you push like 3 or 4 versions in a row, will you have the 4 versions linger in cache until like 8 hours?
Yep, it is possible.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
just to be defensive, that we're not artificially increasing the footprint. This one, I think it's more important than the pre-warming. I would vote yes, but Stas?
Yeah. My issue is with commits. Like, how do we invalidate commits?
Right. So I think this would be up to each diff scenario, right? Because in the diff scenario, do you
Yeah,
ever
we have.
invalidate it?
I mean, for primary diffs, we can invalidate it because we have versions. For commits, only have once you commit it, it's committed.
Yeah,
It stays
it's
there
committed.
for it stays there for 8 hours. If it's access. If it's not, then
I think that's the thing, right? I think for each scenario, we'd likely have to have different strategies for invalidating, and yeah, I'll stay there. I think they will have different things because in the commits probably doesn't make sense to invalidate ever the commit unless it's been, what do you call it? Redacted or cleaned out because of security reasons or something. In that case, we'd like to clean it from cache, but that's such a rare occurrence, might not even be worth caring about. It'll just expire. I would say that it depends on the situation. Stanislav?
I agree on that. I feel like we should only cache the latest version of the MR and nothing else, because that is a hot path on the MR. And if you need another version, well, you'll have to wait just a bit longer, but that's still all right. We are still delivering good performance. I think it's reasonable to clear cache for stale versions, especially rebases. Rebased versions are just plain wrong. You don't get anything useful from them. And maybe closed MRs can also be freed of cache because you rarely visit closed MRs or review them, right? So that could save us some space.
yeah,
Closed, not merged.
Yeah, closed.
why not include merge? Just thinking about that.
That's a really good question. The merge thing, and we were going through this with the conversations of the homepage for action-focused MR homepage. The merged MRs, there's a window of time where they're still valuable because people are going to come back, people are noticing that thing got merged. And in the homepage, because it's not cached on Redis, the idea is that we're going to be showing, like, I don't know, 2 weeks or whatever it is, the recently merged MRs. So I think there's still an argument to be made that MRs that was just merged for a time window will still be potentially accessed or likely. Maybe we could use AI to kind of like give us percentage of this sort of thing. But I think eventually it's just like we just let it expire, let it invalidate. And I have a
think
call. Yeah, go on.
merged MRs can be cleared as well because we can apply the same client-side logic. If you visit an overview tab and the cache is cleared, we'll prefetch the diffs for you, and that will create a cached copy. And this will live as long as other cached MRs live. So if an MR is merged and gets visited after the fact it was merged, it will still have the cached version after the first visit. So we'll free space for MRs that don't get visited, but if you do visit this MR, it will be fast, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking like, why should we not include merge MRs? That's why I'm thinking like we should own cache open MRs. Because those are the MRs that I expect would be accessed more frequently. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that. As a flat rule kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think we're good then. Next question. How do we tackle translated text? Do we cache per locale? So Stanislav already posted a suggestion in the issue, so included a call on the cache key. So can be done. That will work. But the downside is it will increase the storage space, storage usage, since the number of locales will be the multiplier of that. So it's like if we have if you have like a 10 MB cache for an MR, and there are 20 locales, that will be like 200 MB for one MR. So, yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm feeling iffy about Redis caching, because aside from that, it's only showing 90 to 22% for now. It seems like we also need to increase the storage usage.
Can I ask, of the content being cached, what are the strings that are translatable? Because a lot of the UI will be dynamic, will be view apps, but what are the things you're thinking about making cache that will
For
be
example,
translatable?
viewers, like if you have no previews, that is in English and that is translatable.
So the error messages and stuff.
Yeah, messages, I think we'll have more stuff as soon as this grows.
Okay.
We can sort of hack it to make dynamic on the client, but since we all know how German looks like with smaller English words, I expect it will cause layout shifts sooner or later.
Yeah. Yeah, and the wording changes length and everything. So no, I think we have to think about it. But the question is, should those strings be cached in Redis, or should we do a quick string replacement after we get things from cache? That is, I think, the question here. I'm with Patrick. I think this is, if depending on the size of the instance, you can have a multitude of locales on the user's preferences. So it's not even something you can control or predict. It's based on user usage or on usage, user usage. So I think that's the gist of here. It's just like potentially what might be smarter is if we avoid those translated strings to go into the cache, whether by keeping the English with some marks and then we replace them, or we keep just some placeholders and then we replace them before we print it, before we on render, on fetch from Redis. We have sort of like a string replacement that adds time, I know, but it just feels like you already have too many variations of a diff, like inline, parallel, maybe new modes that we might be pulling in later. It just feels, for cache purposes, I wouldn't cache them. I would find another way to handle this. I don't know.
Well, there's another point, which is translations can change over time, right? So if accidentally we change something in English to a different form, that can become untranslated, and that also is not tracked by our cache key. So if we change a phrase, it might be different from the cached one.
I'm not too worried about it, because worst case scenario, in 8 hours, right, that string will be shown the new updated version of it.
Yes, and that's why I have my another suggestion is to cache just the default locale of the GitLab. So if you have a local GitLab instance, you already have your primary locale set up. We just cache this locale and don't deal with others.
Can we mark those strings? So for example, can we find a way to delimitate a string that is translatable on the default locale? It doesn't have to be in code. It could be a comment or something like that. What I'm trying to get at, later, we might want to explore the option of, after you get the copy from cache, before you put it out, you just like pass a quick string replacement for the keys or something.
The problem is that it takes time. Like if the string is very, very, very large, it will also consume memory and time. And as more transforms we do, it gets progressively slower, right?
I know.
The best place to do it is on the backend, not on the client.
Correct. Yeah. Hang on a second. Okay, so I think to your question is that I wouldn't include the locale in the keys. That was like the question that you're asking. I think we might have to spend some time thinking about how we can do this still elegantly in a way that is readable on the code base, but still allow for translation. But yeah, caching multiple versions, I don't think is the way. We have to find another way. And I was thinking about, potentially even like have, instead of having the whole error message HTML somewhere in the thing. And you're right that it does add time and it adds, memory usage and all that stuff. But try to think of like quick ways that would allow us to detect whether that output has replaceable strings. If it does, we'd replace them with a whole other cached version or of an error message that would much more frequently accessed than single full diffs. Anyway, I'm rambling. It's probably other ways to do it, but
I feel like the fastest way to do it, if we would like to avoid this problem completely, is to try to store translatable strings as some kind of identifiers or just as is, but in a way that can be searched reliably in the strings, and then replace it on the fly. It might not be as a big hit as I imagine, so we probably need to make a POC with just doing that. We'll probably need some different helper functions to translate the strings, and also we'll need to lint against that. So everything inside rapid diffs cannot use your standard translatable helpers.
Yeah,
I think for now,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, for now, the decision is to not include it in the cache key. We'll find another way to deal with translations. But I don't know, Patrick, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just have a wild idea. I don't know if it's feasible, but what if we cache? I mean, it's somehow the same idea of string replacement. So, if our translation in code is like using the underscore helper, right? So if we render that text as is, and then cache it, and then after fetching from the cache, replace it, is it actually safe?
I was already thinking about what would be the commit I would have to do to exploit this to render a file filled with passwords on the server. I don't know. I'm just already like gone. I think if you used a delimitator of a template of that is controlled by us, and those parts, those sections will get properly rendered, we might have some safety there because it's contributed to the code base. But if you're doing that to the diffs part, the whole thing, if you're just doing a render of the whole thing, I think that could be problematic.
I think the closest thing to use for that is HTML comments, which are kind of safe, right? And also, there is no way to make it exploitable because we are replacing it with just translated strings, right? So there is no way to run JavaScript or something else using this. It might break HTML for some of the cached diffs, right? Because if it matches exactly our translated string, it might break. But if we are using HTML comments for that, we should be safe, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, shut the comments, benchmark. I'm just
Do
thinking
we have a way
how
to override our underscore helper in rapid diffs module? Like, is there a way in Ruby to tell that if you're inside rapid diffs, underscore helper works differently from other parts of GitLab?
right now I'm not sure, but it's well, in view components we have access to helpers. It's still the same helpers that we have in the rest of the application. We could have our own another helper. We can have another helper specific for rapid diffs. That's what I'm thinking, instead of like overriding the same helper. So it's more, it's more explicit that way.
I think the takeaway here is that we're not going to be including that in the cache key, but we'll find out a way to deal with translations. So maybe we can move on. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, cache limits. I wonder, how do we set them, and where do we start caching, and when do we stop caching? So clearly we don't need cache for a single file changed with 2 lines, right? Doesn't make sense to store it in Redis at all. But when do exactly we need caching? That is still an open question. I think that ties to the performance measurement issues that we have. Like, as soon as we get the numbers of how slow the MRs are, we might get a basic idea of when it starts to get really slow and we need to start caching this stuff.
And so
Yeah,
what
I
are
was
we-
just going to say,
go ahead,
Patrick. There's a lag,
So-
sorry.
Yeah, as I was thinking, like, what numbers are we thinking right now? Like, how will we know what numbers do we need to test and benchmark?
Like, clearly, if you have 5,000 lines changed, that can benefit from caching, obviously. If
Yeah,
you have
but
100 lines changed, is it fast
Yeah.
enough? I don't know. At least locally, when I work on rapid diffs and viewers, even, I don't know, 500 files feels kind of snappy. I don't feel like I could be feeling much better with caching.
So I think we have the answer in the blueprint. So I think what we'll have. All right. Are you seeing my screen? No, now you're seeing my screen. It has the time to first diff. So that event that we have there, the first dive field show, happens before 3 seconds mark. This includes like the whole request, right? So I guess what we'll have to do is, once we start doing this performance metrics that Stanislav was saying, is like how big can we have the MRs be without violating? Sorry, how many? If you order them by size, how many? What's the threshold that we can get away with skipping caching and still get it beneath 3 seconds? And we can even make it faster if we think that is feasible. But I think that would be like our helping to choose. I think the decision is, we'll have a limit where we don't start caching right away on every smaller MRs. We'll have a threshold to begin caching and a threshold to stop caching. Which threshold is that? I think that's going to be experimentation once we start having performance gathering information. But I think that's our target, is if we get that without caching for like files for MRs with less than 100 files, maybe that's the answer, and we'll go from there. But I don't know what that answer is.
I have a question for Patrick. Do we store added and removed lines in the database somewhere? Like the counters?
Like total added and removed lines per file
Yeah, yeah. No, for
Diff
the
stats
whole MR.
for the entire MR.
for MRs. Don't forget the repository, folks. Gavin is right there.
Yeah. I know we
So
have
yeah,
the added and changed lines per file. So if we have that, we can sum them up. So we can get it.
The
But-
problem is that to sum them up, you need to the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Your context window. And that might not be possible for the streaming endpoint, for example. We don't have the context for the first 5 files or for the rest of the MR.
But I know we have diff stats though. I just need to
Yeah,
confirm.
if we have diff stats stored somewhere, we can basically take it from the database, figure out how many lines total we need to display, average, and just decide upon that factor. If it's like more than 500 lines, maybe we need to start caching. And it gets pretty simple from that.
I think Gitly has an RPC for this, doesn't it?
For diff stats,
So
yes.
yeah, so my point is if it's not on the database and we're rendering a commit on the repository, that information is available to us if we need to work with it.
Yeah.
I was going to say something, but then I forgot. It wasn't interesting. Never mind. Yeah, I just say that I like the idea of a lower in upper limit. That's to me, that's a good idea.
If we have these limits, does it mean that we'll be getting cache miss for every single request for the MRs that don't need cache? Like I'm trying to figure out if there's a faster path for this if the MR is not cached. Yeah, maybe there is. I think diff stream endpoint will need a special parameter telling us like this is not cached at all. So we don't perform this check because smaller
How do you know?
MRs, when we render the page, this information should be already available for us, right?
I mean the diff stats. You mean the front end should help the back end by telling them don't even check cache, just go straight.
Yeah.
Sure, that could be even a flag on the cat. It could be a flag on the back end because they can have the logic sitting on the back end and tell us cache diff or not cache diff, and we just pass
The
that on the
endpoint
requests.
is generated on the backend, so we can do this on the backend completely. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I like that idea. And the way that I'm seeing it is the cache miss here for the MRs, which are the most intensive usage, I would say. It's still going to hit the database. It's not always going to go to Gitly. So we still have like a multiple level like protection against, load and everything. There is even like potential things in the future where if we choose to cache things on the client based on repeated visits, we might not even have to go to the network. So imagine you coming back to the same MMR. If we somehow cache locally client side the HTML rendered of the diffs, why am I going to the server? So that is something that we don't have anything planned yet, but that's a possibility. Which is a shift in the way we do this is if we cache that locally and use that server side rendered HTML as is that it comes from the server, we just cache it locally. So all of this to say is like we'll have multiple levels of caching, I think. So I think we're okay in this sense. Yeah. Okay, should we go to merge conflicts?
I feel so.
Let's go. How do we deal?
Yeah, I was thinking that sometimes we have merge conflicts that appear during the lifespan of a single version, and we need to burst cache in case of any merge conflict. I wonder, is there an event that we could use when a merge conflict appears? We should just burst the cache.
Well, on the back end, for us to determine that we have a worker, checks the mergeability of the MR. and that determines if this MR can be merged or not. If it cannot be merged because of a merge conflict, we mark as it can't be merged. So
Okay.
that part we can invalidate the cache.
Can we end up in a situation? Sorry.
Take your time. Get some water. Cough it out. We'll wait. No rush. We've all been there. If I had $1 every time that happened, I'd had at least $5. Just like several times already. So, gosh, it's such a stressful thing when you're talking and you're like, my voice doesn't come out. So yeah, no worries, Stas. Take it easy. I was writing his question and then I got hung up. Can we end up in a situation? Which situation is he talking about? Let's take some guesses.
You're right, can we end up in a situation? Cough, cough, cough. And then we realize what you've done.
Yeah. That's good to know that we have a worker, at least that checks the mergeability of it. I am wondering, like, if we have merge conflicts, I'm still going to need to look at the MR to see that it has merge conflicts and where they are, which file has them. Why would we invalidate the cache in that sense?
It will be a different diff. It's possible it's a different diff. Because by default we show the head diff, right? The version of the MR that will be merged on the target branch. But we can't show that if there's conflict. We revert back to the base diff.
Oh, right. I remember that. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Now I get it. It changes the diff essentially. That's what.
Yep.
Yeah. Understood. That won't happen in repository commits, so we're good. And doesn't happen with compare. Oh, it can happen with compare revisions, right?
No. I haven't tried actually. I haven't tried comparing.
I'm having a brain freeze. If you're comparing to revisions, you just get the diff of it. You won't get a merge conflict because you're not merging. It's not you're not trying to merge it. You're just comparing them. So they'll always be possible to compare to generate a comparison, right? Is that my thinking straight?
Yeah.
On the repository side of things, conflicts is not a thing, is it?
I don't know about the compare revisions. Because if we compare two different branches and there's conflict, what will it show?
Oh, okay.
So my question was, can we end up in a situation where we have a race condition between us visiting the page and worker checking for conflicts, right? So we'll be returning cached version while there's a conflict because we haven't run the worker logic yet.
Potentially.
But depends, because the backend decides what diff should be displayed.
Right.
So I'm thinking. So what's the specific scenario that can be a race condition? Like the MR changes request comes first, and then the worker comes in.
I assume there's a queue for this stuff to happen, right? As soon as the target branch updates, eventually worker will get to all the MRs and check if they have conflicts or not. But if you're visiting this page before that happens, there is already a conflict, but you are just not aware of it. Because we are not checking for that on the backend side at this moment. We are just returning the cache. And that means we either need to check for merge conflicts every time we request the cached version, or we end up with kind of outdated cache for client.
Yeah, I mean, the backend code checks if there's conflict or not. before we render the diff. That's what we do. That's outside of caching. So
Yeah, but if we skip the fetching diffs, right? If we cache only by the version
no, I mean
number,
we need to
right?
we need to get the version, right? That's
Yeah.
when we get the version, that's when that's when we check if there's conflict or not.
Okay. Okay, that answers my question. Thanks.
Yeah.
Does fetching a version mean also fetching all the diffs, or
No.
it's just a version?
It just
Okay.
checks the merge request diff record.
Thanks.
I mean that's for merge requests. I mean there's no conflicts for commits, so that's okay. But I'm still not sure about the comparing visions.
Thanks. I think we can get to the next question if we have time. There's another problem that if you have a target branch that is different from the default branch, that is usually like master branch or develop branch, if that branch gets deleted, you're automatically reassigned to the default branch. And I'm not sure if that is reflected in the version itself. And we probably need to deal with that, right?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. So you're talking about retargeting, right?
Yeah.
When the source, when the when a target branch the MR gets deleted, we retarget it to target the default branch.
I was
Yeah.
thinking that we should include version number and also target branch in the cache key, so it's always reliable. And that way, if the target branch gets retargeted, we use a newer one and we get a cache miss and create a new version of the cache.
Well,
does it work, do you think?
I mean, we won't need to do that if we recreate a new version when the branch gets deleted.
I don't think it gets created.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm not sure about.
I recently discovered this because I have my refactoring MR, which was targeting file viewers MR, and I don't think a new version was created for it. Because the branch got deleted, it now targets master, but I don't see a new version at all.
Even after a refresh?
Yeah.
That's weird. So your divs are now kind of wacky.
Yeah, the diffs were incorrect. So once
Yeah.
I opened the page, the version was the same, but it included changes from the target branch, obviously. And I had to basically recreate the MR, but the version didn't change. So it means like we likely need to use both. We need to use the version number and we need to use the target branch.
I'm thinking we need to actually create a version on the target.
Technically, you're right.
Yeah, because that sounds like a bug to me, at least. Since the MR is targeted, it should show the updated diff, not the old one or not the broken one.
I think it is a bug, but for the sake of just
Yeah.
making it work, probably for the first iteration we'll use target branch, and once we fix it, we can safely remove it.
Yeah, we can do the framers.
We're running out
I
of
think
time,
we
folks.
discussed. Yeah, we discussed my next point already. So, I just have a last question for feature flag for caching. Do you think it makes sense to add one, just so we
Yep.
can quickly switch
Definitely.
to? Okay.
Definitely, we should. So once we roll it out in production.
Feels like we've had incidents about Redis.
Yep.
I have that answer.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds smart. Yeah, I agree. Forgot about another way of caching. Client side caching. Yeah. Just a thought. All right. Anything else we need to discuss today?
Well,
Gavin,
we don't have time.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes. Right. I just wanted to check with Gavin because there's assignments for this milestone to add the streaming endpoint. Do you need any support? Do you have all the information you need for that? Any questions?
I've been working on some other stuff last week. My plan is to start that pretty much after this call. So I'm hoping, hoping to have a look at it now, and any questions or concerns I have,
Patrick.
I'll raise them with
Yeah,
folk.
you should already have an MR adding a streaming
Yeah,
endpoint to the MR.
I've been looking at the
So-
streaming endpoint for the M more, so my plan is to kind of, start with at least a draft around the same sort of structure, and then we'll
Yeah.
see where we are.
Then tag me or status dev as well.
Yeah, I'll reach out
Sweet.
to you in the issue if I'm struggling. But yeah, hopefully I can give an update about that at least, in this next meeting.
Amazing. Good stuff.
I think there's also another issue which is a stretch. I don't know if I'll get to that this milestone, but
Yeah,
see.
so FYI, Stanislav and Patrick, I think we were given 4 issues. One for streaming diffs, one for streaming compare revisions, one for rendering the first files of diffs, the one for rendering first files of compare revisions. The one that got scheduled was streaming for diffs, and the other one is a stretch, the rendering X files. So the other 2 issues weren't even like scheduled, the compare revisions, because of capacity and other priorities and stuff. So, but we'll learn from that because if we have MRs and diffs, compare revisions we can handle later because it's a bit of a lesser thing case, but the commits are definitely the most important ones. We're definitely investing time on that. So that was the thinking. All right. Some weeks we skip these calls, and others we hit the whole hour. Look at us. All right. Thanks everybody for the great discussion. And Stanislav was saying that he will post the discussion in the caching issue. Amazing.
Yeah. Thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
And thanks Patrick for making this POC.
Yes,
Okay.
very much so. Thank you so much.